Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host, and you can follow me on Twitter at @SheKnowsArsenal. Second show of the day. If you missed the first one, I suggest after you watch this one to go back and watch that one. I was on with Kaya from Football London as well as Laura Kirk, and we had a little bit of a happy hour show. We did a little bit of trivia while we talked about Arsenal transfer rumors. So when you guys get a chance, go ahead and watch that on the replay. But on this show, what I want to do is talk about players that are being heavily linked with Arsenal reliably, Ben White, Lokonga, and James Maddison, and talk about how they can fill gaps in the squad and help us improve from a tactical perspective, from a formation perspective, and just, kind of talk about it and see where we still may need to have some improvement as well. Even if we bring in these players, there's still going to be gaps in the squad. So we can talk about what's missing and maybe what needs to be addressed, as well as the positions that they would be filling too. So yeah, if you guys are in the chat box, let me know how you guys are feeling. Say hello, good afternoon, whatever, all those good things. Thank you for being here and liking and sharing and subscribing my content. I really appreciate it. And for today's stream, I have George on, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. George, hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So before we get into the football, let's, if you guys don't know, George hit 3K on Twitter today. So we're going to say, yay, George. We're so proud of you. And yeah, you're growing, you're doing good things. And so I just wanted to congratulate you here on the stream as well. Of course, we talk in like our little groups and all that kind of stuff, but I just wanted to, give you that now. And also you guys, you're welcome. And if people don't know, like, George doesn't just do my show. He has his own show as well called Ball Over Passion. So George, can you let everybody know just kind of what that show is about, where they can find it, and all those types of things?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I finally released my picture, so sorry for everybody today. You see me now. But yeah, you can find me at Ball Over Passion, on Twitter as well as on YouTube. Here we have our own channel, Ball Over Passion. And really, we're just talking about football, a little bit more technical analysis stuff. I like to get into the nitty gritty about lineups, whether they matter and how we see players. So hopefully I can try to share whatever limited knowledge I have with the rest of you, and I hope to make it an education every time. So yeah, you can find me there, and of course here on Jess's channel, and make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe to both. It'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. Make sure you guys like all this stuff, follow, subscribe, all this other things, all the things you do for me, do those for George, because he adds so much value on this channel, and on his own stuff, he's obviously just as good. So make sure you guys go there. Let's see what you guys are saying in the chat box. George with the good hair. I love it. Hair transplant, expert.
Yes.
You don't have one yet, but what do you guys call it? If you guys have the creep, if you get the creep, you're going to go ahead and...
If you get the creep, that XH, the hair growth, the expected growth, we got to watch out for that.
I love it. Hey, gal. Nice to see you in the chat. Karan says he's proud of you.
Thanks,
I love it. Mike says congrats, Olivier. So there's tons of congrats in there for you. So yeah, but let's go ahead and get into the football. So what we want to kind of talk about before we we get into just like real specifics, I want to talk about the similarities in these players in terms of profile and what they bring from a technical perspective. Because for Arsenal, I think it's really important for us to get the technical quality of our players, to a better level. So for you, what are the similarities in quality between a Ben White, a James Maddison, and a Lokonga?
Yeah, so really what's quite clear is that they're really good ball progressors. So all of them are very dominant on the ball, and it's not just on the half turn, but they're very good at carrying it over larger distances. So we're very clear that's the common trait that we're looking to have. We're looking to disrupt systems through ball progression, but mainly ball carrying. And so that's the first step that we really look at. And also they're really quite good over the first 5 yards. That's something I've really talked about quite a lot. So that first 5 yard burst is so critical in the Premier League, really, because we're looking at a new modern way of playing where it's just about counter press and how do we transition between the thirds from defense to attack as quickly as possible. And so when you look at these players, really quick is great on the half turn, but they can take the ball, carry it into midfield, or even, if you're James, farther up into the last part of the pitch, but they all have that. And then lastly, they're great in the duels. So 1v1, both defensively and one-on-one, really, they're great in contact on the ball. So it's not just about receiving, but it's can you carry through with your play beyond that, because you're going to be challenged. And I think all of these players, what you can see is when they get the ball, they don't lose it, but they don't mind some contact and they're able to continue going. And so it really comes down to that kind of Arteta player where we've talked about before, where these guys don't only just have these qualities, but now they're versatile, right? Like when you look at Lokonga, when you look at Ben White, and when you look at James Maddison, what's very clear is, yeah, they like certain areas on the pitch, but they can play multitude of positions. So you're looking at Swiss Army knife players that can solve so many problems. And what that really does is, as a coach, I no longer have to use specific substitutions to employ different tactics. So when we look at really West Ham, I use that as my best example mid-game, really, where we started in a pivot and we went to 4-3-3. When you include players like Lokonga, James Maddison, that midfield switch doesn't become with a substitution. Rather, you can just say, okay, James, I want you to drop deep because, I've seen you do it for Leicester. You've played in a center midfielder role. So you can either play up top in that traditional cam or at the back. And you know what? Ben does the same thing. He's played DM, right back, and center back. So just to summarize, because I talked a lot, essentially is 1v1 duels is great in all those players. They're versatile. They don't really suit a specific system. They can do really many players on the pitch or systems on the pitch. And then lastly, what's great is they're ball carrying progressors. And so that first 5 yard burst is the common thing amongst all of them, really.
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you look at, like you said, they're good even in a physical situation, because in the Premier League, although passing and all of that is really important, players that tend to be a little bit on the slight side, a little bit on the weaker side, tend not to do as well because you can easily get knocked off the ball. That's the equalizer in the Premier League, is physical. So if you have players that not only can pass but can progress the ball with their dribbling skills, it's so much easier than relying on passing when you know that people are just going to smash you. If you look at somebody like Granit Xhaka, who is really one-footed, he has to do a lot to kind of maneuver around when people put bodies on him, because he's not as technically gifted as other players. And when you see somebody like Thomas, when he receives the ball with one foot and just out the other side, and we need players that are able to switch feet, use both feet, are a little bit more technical, and when they're getting smashed, they can still hold on to the ball. And that's what I see with all three players. They have that good awareness. They can kind of do it all, and we haven't really had that in our team. Saka can do it as well, Emile Smith-Rowe to a certain extent. So I like these players. I like them a lot. I think they have similarities, even though they play on different areas of the pitch, really.
I think I love that you brought up Xhaka, because I said this in one of my tweets where I think getting rid of Xhaka brings down a lot of narratives. And what it does is it sets a reminder to the Arsenal fans about what Arteta values. And, he's emblematic, or kind of the antithesis of everything that we've just said. he's a great player in his own right, but he's very specific to a certain system. You have to play to Granit Xhaka's strengths in order for him to shine. He's great maybe 1v1, but doesn't have that 5-yard burst. He doesn't have that half-turn ability. He's not versatile. So when you start looking at these traits, I think it's really important only because it might give fans a little bit of clarity, but also some calming nature about how do I decipher these links? How do I understand this plan that, I'm sure we'll get into, and we have really in past pods, but it's just, you have to maybe look at what traits is something that we're looking for, and then you can kind of evaluate what's real and what's not. And then once you see that plan, it becomes a lot easier to understand where we're going to go in the future.
100%. And a lot of you guys are agreeing in the chat box. And I think, especially on this podcast, because we tend to get a little bit deeper into the tactics and all that kind of stuff, we all know that ball progression is one of our biggest weaknesses. We just don't have great dribblers in our side. And yes, you can progress the ball through passing, but like I said, if people are blocking passing lanes, you have to be able to get out of trouble in the middle of the pitch in a different way. And we only have a couple players that are good at dribbling, so all 3 players definitely have that, and I love that about these players. So I just want to show up on the screen really quick, or we're going to have this up pretty much for the rest of the pod. But this is essentially what the team would look like right now if we did bring those players in. So this is kind of in a 4-2-3-1, which is what we play now. We can kind of talk about a little bit later if this can shift into a 4-3-3 of some sort. But what we kind of see is Chambers is still here. We haven't really been reliably linked with a right back as of yet, so I'm just going to assume that Chambers is there. White/Saliba in that back line next to Gabriel and Tierney. Thomas Partey in a double pivot with Lokonga. Maddison/ESR in the 10 role with Pepe, Saka. That can obviously be ESR as well on the wings. Martinelli on the wings as well. And Aubameyang through the center as our center forward. So when you look at this, do you see, this has to be an upgrade? You have to, when you look at this, get a little bit excited, right, George?
I mean, just look at the midfield trio. In terms of the qualities, what would you say about Arsenal have we lacked this season? Tenacity in midfield, ball progression, and balance. And, right away, what you're seeing, which is massive, is you're seeing players that are complementary to each other. When you're asking me, George, can this turn into a 4-2-3? Very easily. Partey steps up 5 to 10 yards, and James Maddison, who, by the way, I don't know if people know, he played as a left center midfielder for Brendan Rodgers in a 4-1-4-1. So when you're talking about how malleable this looks and how, I guess, innovative it really looks, you've got Lokonga and Partey, who in deep are these ball carrying progressors. And I doubt that actually they're really going to be playing together, to be honest with you. I think really Lokonga is an understudy to Partey because they're very similar in profile. They really are these conductor 8 types that, on the ball are just incredible in terms of ball progression, but, may not have the greatest defensive awareness, at least in Lokonga's view. But when you look at that midfield, it's just exactly everything that we lack. And, I really think midfield is the engine room to how you want to succeed as a team. And you win and lose battles there. It really translates to winning and losing games. So that's the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now that we're addressing very quick, which is really encouraging to see because, I think that's going to be the biggest thing that will help us because what you're looking at right now are a set of players that are elite in the buildup. And for a team that right now we'll probably get into is they've got the 3rd best defensive record in the league. And I see people looking at Ben White and saying he's not a great defender. But what you have to realize is because our system is so great, we're facing less shots. And so statistically, you can go back and look at it. But we don't face as many shots because our system is so great. And so when you do that, shot stopping no longer becomes a big part of your kind of critique of a defense. It's really building up. And so you don't really need to look at the defensive numbers when your system is so compact. And then you need to focus on progression because if you're going to commit to this style of play, we've got to recruit to players that can do that and carry that out. Otherwise, they're left in no man's land and your system falls apart. So yeah, I just love what I'm seeing right now because I'm seeing a plan, a common thread between all of these players, and that looks amazing.
Yeah, and something that a lot of Arsenal fans have been kind of frustrated with, especially in this last season, with the mistake against Burnley. We had some dodgy moments in the back, I think in the Europa League as well with Ceballos trying to pass out of the back. And when we switched from, I'm just going to be real, like for me, I really think it starts with the goalkeeper. In this particular instance, I have Leno here, but I fully expect us to still get Onana, and he's much better with the ball at his foot than Leno. But just for the sake of this, I just have Leno here because this is what we would start with. But I think everybody in that back line and the two in the pivot right in front need that box that we talk about as well, with the center backs and the center midfielders right there. They have to be comfortable on the ball, plus the goalkeeper. And you saw how the lack of confidence creeped in when we had Emmy versus Leno as the person starting our build-up from the back. So when you look at the fact that we're looking at somebody like Onana, and then you're going to have Ben White / Saliba, Gabriel, maybe a Basuma, and a Thomas Partey, we're talking about 4 players that are, maybe Gabriel a little bit less so, but relatively really decent on the ball. And that makes a big difference between like when you have Leno, Xhaka there, and Holding, doesn't it? Isn't it a lot more secure in that way?
Oh my gosh, insanely more secure. There's a reason why we say we want ball-carrying progressors and not necessarily ball-carrying passers. And that's because one of the critiques of Arsenal this season is actually, if you look at our progressions and our ball entries into the box, they're actually quite good. In fact, they're excellent. They're not just good, they're excellent. And when you're looking at that next step of taking the efficiency up, what you really need to do is you need to speed up these transitions, but you need dribblers to do that. Why? Because if you block passing lanes as a coach, a dribbler will disrupt that system. That's kind of evident in every single third of the pitch. So when you start adding those into our build-up, you end up increasing the speed of these attacking patterns, and we're going to end up getting quicker up the pitch faster. And what that does is it allows us to kind of sustain attacking patterns, really. And so when we look at that pivot, we mentioned Basuma. Why? Because we need to look at the type of sitter that we want to complete that quartet that we've talked about. And it harkens back to our invincible days when we had Gilberto Silva, Patrick Vieira, Kolo Touré, and Sol Campbell. We've got our tight ends in Gabriel and now White or Saliba, which are just excellent as a core group of center backs. But when you go into that pivot now, we just need that sitter, that facilitator to help release Thomas Partey, and then you just end up controlling transitions, right? So not only are we going to get quicker up the pitch because of increasing on Holding to White, making these upgrades in our build-up, but now we're going to be able to stay in that opposition pitch because now we've got a pivot that will stop anybody trying to counter us on the opposition half. And we haven't been able to do that because our technical quality in the back line is so poor that, Mikel has had to ask everybody to drop in deep. This is kind of the consequence of us not having great technique in the back. And so if you guys are at all worried, why do we need a Ben White? It's about increasing the technical competency in the back line. That's really what it is. When you look at all of this stuff, the deep pivot players, Lokonga, Onana, once you have technique, you don't have to fear and tell players to drop back. We can give freedom to the attack to perform.
Exactly. And it's just how we kind of talk about in the midfield, how we knew we need better like-for-like replacements in the midfield, because when Thomas was not available, everything changed. How we played significantly dropped off. We could not play like consistently without him. And it's very similar when you have David Luiz in there pinging balls, Hollywood balls into the channels in behind Saka and behind Pepe and our players up there, and able to play the ball out of the back and dribble out of the back as well. And then when you go from that to Holding, your entire gameplay changes. So as much as I'm like, okay, well, if it comes between having to get a midfielder and a center back, I'm like, get a midfielder. But if you're going to tell me that we're still going to get that midfielder, but we could also get a technically really sound center back that can also play right back in defensive midfield, I'm like, sign me up for that. Because when you have Saliba and White, your technical quality is not going to go down. Whereas if you just have Saliba, who's 19, 20 years old, and you have Holding, I think Arteta's lenient, or the way that he likes to lean on maybe more experienced players, maybe we'll see Holding a little bit more than we want to. And there's no excuse. If you have White and Saliba, you play one or the other. And there's, a point here from Barry. Thank you so much for your your comment about how good is White defending one-on-one situations, thinking of games, say, versus City, where we have more of the ball. The reality, Barry, is that there's very few games where we're going to have less of the ball than the other team. We are a possession-based team. I think most games last season we had more of the possession, except for against City, Chelsea, these types of teams. And that's only like, let's say 6 games out of the season. So if there's 32 other games where we're going to have a bulk of the possession, which people tend to give it to us anyway, I think we need to make decisions about the way we play based on the majority of the types of games that we'll be playing versus like, okay, let's get a more defensively sound center back with less technical quality. When you look at City and the balance that they have in their center backs, they have Ruben Diaz, a more traditional center back, and they have John Stones, a ball-playing center back, and that's essentially what we'd have. So I really think I think Arteta's building a City-type center back pairing. We really can. I mean, would you be upset at that? Not really.
Yeah, and I mean, look, let's get into White, because I think ultimately, I kind of was talking to you kind of in the background where I see a lot of fear with Ben White. George, we can't be spending 45 million. And you know what? I have agreed in terms of, looking at our monetary funds. I can't sit here and say, my gosh, I'm worried that we're spending that. But, I think a lot of the Ben White worries actually come from the fact that it's not due to the quality of the player, but maybe the off-the-pitch assumptions it may mean on our budget as a whole. So kind of what I mean by that is I think a lot of people think 45 million for Ben White equals no right back, or 45 million for Ben White means 20 million off priority positions. But I really don't think that's the case. And so while there might be better quality to cost deals, he is among the best in build-up and first phase progression in the league. That's undoubted. So when you look at Ben White's quality, you cannot doubt that, as he's probably among the best in anybody in terms of his numbers. And then when you start to actually consider, let's look at Holding, Chambers, what is the drop off in quality from the start of our starting position? And it's really quite stark. And so when you start raising that floor, it's about raising the floor of the team. We've really said this before, where like you said, you don't want to go from a Saliba maybe or a Luiz quality-wise on the ball to a Rob Holding. It really is such a massive drop-off. And just for people that think we're overpaying, I'm sorry, but Nathan Ake went for 40 million pounds last year. That's the going rate. And so I really think much of this is more anxiety about our off-the-pitch budget as a whole, as opposed to the player. So when we look at it, it's such a great signing in so many ways. It's just, I think we have a bigger budget than people think. And I think that's really where maybe the fear or anxiety comes from. Because, again, our defensive system, we're not going to be facing shots. So, Barry, you're talking about defending 1v1 situations. He's competent. I wouldn't say that he excels in it, but he's very competent at it. When you look at Brighton, he did perform quite excellently in there. I don't think he's stellar at it, but he does it well. The issue is our system doesn't allow for those isolation moments anymore, right? That's what we have to think about. And so when our system is as compact as it is and we're not facing as many shots, that no longer becomes a worry in terms of what we need to prioritize. It's the buildup. It's making sure that our on-the-ball quality is amazing. And you know what? Ben White is the best, or among the best, rather, not the best, but among the best in the league at doing it. That's just, a fact. And, he's done quite well. Marcelo Bielsa loved him. And, I would argue Bielsa's got a lot of spaces in terms of his system. So, when you're looking at it, it's not that he's weak 1v1. I think he's actually quite well, and he does quite well at it. But in terms of on the ball, I just see it. And when you add that to the point that, it's probably not going to affect our budget, just sign me up. I don't understand. Again, it's us raising the floor of this team, and I don't think anybody can kind of argue against that. You have to look at it. Do you want Holding in there on injury or Chambers, or would you prefer Ben White? I know for me, I would prefer Ben White. And if that's the going rate and Arsenal have switched a corner and saying, hey, look, we're going to compete again, I think that's the way to go. So, yeah, no, I love Ben White in terms of what he gives us.
And I think he's like in the 90-something percentile for ball progression. And
that's what I mean.
Like, so we're talking about an elite ball progressor. And somebody else was saying that we would be able to push up the pitch. And one of my biggest criticisms of us is that we tend to play in our half. And we can't play on the halfway line like elite teams do. Elite teams play on the halfway line and push you back into your own box and cause chaos. And we can't do that on the edge of our own box. So if you have ball progressors, people that are really comfortable, and you have athletes, which I'm not necessarily saying that Ben White is the biggest athlete, but when we talk about Saliba and Gabriel and Tierney with elite ball progression skills, we're talking about being able to sit on the halfway line. And those things are really important, you know. So in the chat box, you guys let us know what you're thinking about what we're saying. There's about 92 of you guys watching right now. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and keep all the George praise going on in the chat box. I'm loving it. They're loving what you're saying. So let's just move on and just keep going. But let's talk about speed of play, which is, I think, another kind of like, you know, improvement that we need to make for next season. It just seemed like, and some of this has to do with soft factors like not having fans in the stands. We could kind of see that we had a lot more intensity on the last game of the season when there was fans in the stands. You could just tell. But some of it comes with the fact that we don't have maybe players that can play quickly because they have to shift it onto another foot. Maybe they're not quick enough. Maybe they're not athletic enough. You know, maybe they don't have the footballing IQ to know where the pass is before the ball comes to them so they can make a quick decision. So with these players like a Maddison, a Lokonga, a White, you know, do you think that the speed of play will be something that we'll see, you know, get better next season?
Massively. And, you know, one of the biggest ones outside of that list is Onana. It's going to be a huge difference. I cite the West Ham game a lot because, you know, I think the West Ham game is a perfect picture of what can go wrong and then what can go right in terms of a change in system and what we might expect. So when you look at it, Leno was really quite afraid of sticking to the plan. Let's be real in that game. He went long and immediately we're getting the ball coming back at us and we're 3-0 down. And then when you see the change into a 4-3-3, we had to add somebody because Leno was afraid in terms of our buildup. And so part of that goes into when you analyze Rob's performances in particular. One of my biggest criticism about Rob is that he's very slow releasing the ball. He'll wait, he'll receive, and I don't see him get the ball out quick. One thing that you can say about Ben White and Saliba is they receive the ball and they're very incisive into midfield. Like their first thought is, I need to get rid of my ball into the middle third immediately within the first 3 seconds. You know, as a coach, I have this thing where, you know, I'll tell my players, you got the 3-second rule, and I have a bell. It's really kind of annoying, but I go first second receive, second touch, and set, and third second make the pass. And, you know, if you exceed that, you know, I actually tie their hands behind their back and I start adding some intricate things because what you need is to get the ball and play the pass that's on. It's really important. And, you know, when you look at this modern game of going from defense to attack, that speed of play becomes so key in order to make sure that you get these overloads. So I think a lot of people on Twitter, like they may say, look, we do overloads on the wings, but what does that mean? It's just getting a number advantage, right? Like we're looking to get one more body there than the opposition. And so how do you end up doing that? Well, you got to pull people out of position. And the only way to do that is to get it as quick as you can from the defense to the attack. And because we're adding really the goalkeeper there, we're adding another player and we're stretching the pitch. So when we do break out of this counter press, what you've done is you've eliminated an entire line of defense. And you don't really do that if you slow the play. So if Rob, for example, you know, is holding onto the ball and not getting it into our midfield for Partey to progress, he's now having to beat 2 or 3 players as opposed to 1. If you get it into him quick, you know, he's up the pitch and we've advanced 5 or 10 yards with really taking out a lot of players. So it's twofold. It's double-edged sword. You're not only helping your midfield, but you're helping your defense, you know, and then you just let your attack shine, right? So that's why speed of play is so important. And, you know, it's really undervalued. So when you're looking at a Ben White, you're looking at a William Saliba, why do these make sense? Guys, the first thing that these guys do is they get rid of the ball. You know, they receive and they're really quick, incisive into midfield. And you know what? That's also Maddison and Lokonga. Like if you guys watch these guys play, they receive on the half turn and they're very quick in terms of releasing the ball. And it's essential in terms of making sure that you transition to the half as quick as you can.
Exactly. And another thing that I noticed, and we talk about this, just we've kind of touched on the tip of the iceberg on this conversation about speed of play, but also switching the point of attack. We are very predictable, and we don't have somebody that can just switch the ball from one side of the pitch to the other. I remember Arteta being almost like in awe of Virgil van Dijk the first time that we played them last season. and he had this 40-yard switch that he could do on a dime, and how dangerous that was. And I think from that moment on, I knew that that was something that Arteta really wanted in his team. And that's why David Luiz was so important to us, because when he was in this position, he was able to get that ball over to Tierney, because, Tierney makes these runs up here. And then we were able to create overloads, even with, Aubameyang. Saka could be in this way. And then we would have so many numbers over here, but able to switch the attack quickly. But when we don't have that, and you have somebody like Holding here, there's no out ball, and we can't switch from one side of the pitch to the other. Somebody that's also really good at long range passing is Lokonga. His numbers and his heat map and touch maps show him in the middle of the pitch in the center circle, pinging balls into these half spaces here. That's really dangerous, and we don't actually have that, because when you have somebody like Xhaka here, yes, he's really good at this ball here, but he's not really that great at the ball in behind here. He's just more of like that nice switch from side to side. He's really not good at the diagonal balls. And that's really where Lokonga is good. So besides just the progressive dribbling, he also has really nice passing into areas that are really dangerous, that defenders don't want to have to run into, against your Aubameyangs and your Sakas and your Pepes. So that's also something that we can look at, is we'll have players that can switch the point of attack quickly and get us out of trouble when we're doing these little short passes here. Instead of doing a scary pass back here and letting it get picked off, we can easily just ping it from one side to the other, relieve pressure, and get on the attack against the opposition.
And you don't want to give your opposition time to set up against you, right? Like, why are these switches so important? So when you only have Luiz that's really able to do that, you see less of those Fulham FA Cup final goals, where really, again, there's a really famous video of what Arsenal did in terms of looking how similar these pattern of plays are. And really, it's really quite simple, guys. We overload on one side. We need a quick switch of play, and you end up flooding that area of the pitch. So you let Tierney go, or whoever's on that side, and then it's a really quick cut back into the box and a nice shot. And, the point of that is you don't give the opposition time to settle into their shape. As long as you do that, you're able to get a number on them. And that's how you create those overloads. So when you have players that can do that, it's key. All it is speeding up the play, right? And it is increasing the technical level of our team. And when you do that, you open so many avenues to the attack. And that's actually why I say, adding a DM or adding, a center back would actually help our creativity. And, many people are like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, guys, if we can increase our progression, our speed of play into the opposition half, you're going to end up having a lot more 1v1 opportunities in order to attack and get them into isolation. And that's the name of the game right now. I think coaches are so technical and precise with their positioning right now that these fine margins are actually increasing in the league. It's no longer just the top six that are employing it. You're seeing it with Leeds. You're seeing it with Wolves. You're seeing it with these lower level teams that are trying to do the same thing. And that's because football's moved to a different area. And you know what? The name of the game is progression, speed of play, and ball carrying ability. It's really, those are the kryptonite to so many different, systems.
Exactly, 100%. And I know you guys, I see in the comment section, you guys are loving this level-headed analysis and all that kind of stuff. We love this. Like, I think we could nerd out on this for a while. I'm enjoying it. I'm loving it. But I also want to kind of talk about, I see a lot of Basuma, talks, and I think we just have to get our Basuma agendas out there. We have to get our propaganda out there. George, I think although we know that Lokonga will probably, we're looking at him as a player that would play in a pivot, because he will. We assume that this player is going to be somebody else, so we're thinking it's going to be Basuma. So let's just put him there. Let's just talk about the importance of having a player like Basuma in this position, experience in the Premier League, shut down DM that also has the ability to be press resistant and push us up the pitch. Let's just talk about it just a little bit. And the difference between having somebody like him and a Neves, because there's also talk of Neves in the chat, and the difference between the two.
So really, it actually comes down to Thomas Partey and how you see Thomas Partey, and what's the best way to get an example of, Thomas Partey at his best, really. And so what I look back on is, where did Thomas perform, his role the best? And look, he's a great player, so he can play as a 6, he can play as an 8. But when I look back, Man United, that's one of the best performances that I've seen in a shirt for him. And when I look at who partnered him, it was ironically El Neni. And so when you look at these sitters, let's break it down. You've got two types, right? You've got your kind of 1v1 duel expert that is your traditional P&P, pace and power kind of guy that loves his 1v1 duels, or you have somebody who's more along the deep lying playmaker role, or like a Neves, right? So when you have Basuma and Neves, they really are opposite ends of the spectrum. And actually Locatelli could be in that Neves category, right? But the idea is he's a deep lying playmaker. And look, passing range is great for stretching opposition shapes, but really, I think Partey facilitated his best performances when you give him freedom. Because again, I've said many times, he's a Thiago. You look at his stats, he tops the charts in ball progression, carries, and passes. And so what he needs is this kind of anchor, I call it, this facilitator, really. And that's why El Neni gave him such great performances. It wasn't because El Neni of a quality necessarily, is better than a Granit Xhaka. It's because as a sitter, a facilitator gave Thomas the tools to perform up the pitch. He didn't have to worry about too many jobs, about progressing, about making sure that he's involved as a conductor, but also making sure to stop transitions. So when you compare the two, I fundamentally think that you need to have a 1v1 duel expert in order to release the other side much more. And you're limited kind of as a team in a ceiling if you don't have those 1v1 duel experts that, out wide when they're in isolation, they can track back. They can receive the ball back again. I mean, Basuma makes way too much sense. Okay, when you look at it, not only did he play this role kind of in Brighton, if you actually go down into the stats, most of his progressive passes come from the left. Like in terms of trying to depict the perfect player to release Thomas Partey, I really couldn't see one beyond Basuma, except for Soumare, who I have my own little bias towards. I love him, but that ship has sailed. But the next bet, again, I think it comes down to our debate here. Do you want a deep lying playmaker, or do you want somebody that's a 1v1 duel expert that can kind of compete in transition? And again, it goes back to what do I want and what does Arteta want? And I think we've seen enough quotes. I keep highlighting them on the show, but you know what? Arteta has told us he really does look at aggression and 1v1 duel experts in the Premier League, because he recognizes no matter how much intricate play you might have or increased range of pass, ultimately what the Premier League needs is these 1v1 duel experts, really. And it's not to say that you don't have success on the other ways. You can have success with a deep lying playmaker. I just think it limits the ceiling of the team. And again, the last thing I'll say on it is, why would you get rid of Granit Xhaka, who is arguably among the best in that category, in order to, get maybe a Neves or Locatelli, who, I'm sorry, but in terms of their pure numbers and in terms of their role, isn't that much better? It doesn't make sense to me. I would have rather just kept Granit Xhaka if our goal is to add a sitter that's a deep lying playmaker. And I don't think the other two are necessarily that much of an advantage in the ball progression stats for what they're arguing against. They're a touch more athletic in that aspect, but again, Thomas Partey didn't have his best performances with Xhaka. It was with El Neni, and there was a reason for that. So let's go back to the Invincibles, like we've talked about, that square 1v1 duel experts that are just monsters that you don't want to run past. And if you do that and you control the back, we will be able to sustain way more patterns than, say, you did have a deep lying playmaker. Because again, as an opposition coach, guys, we got to start thinking about, how do I defeat this team? It's not just so much what I can do with the ball, but what do the team look at as our point of weakness? And we've seen it too much. When you have something like Granit Xhaka, people focus on that. And I think it's because we don't understand the type of player that we're dealing with. And I really get frustrated because, it's unfair on the player. I don't want to hammer a player for his athletic limits. It's impossible. Like, I would rather just recruit to a style. If you're going to ask him to defend the halfway line, let's not put a Ruben Neves there. Let's put a Basuma who can track back, because I can assure you, if you're asking Ruben Neves to kind of defend on the halfway line, it's going to be difficult. Ruben Neves, again, with Wolves, right? He was in a 3-5-2 system. Like, remember, guys, he was surrounded by bodies. And that's not really the play that we're going to be initiating, right? So when you have this box, Ruben Neves doesn't play that way. So when you're telling me he can defend in that spot, well, he doesn't play like that for Wolves. You have to be very careful about when you're projecting, who do you want in that role.
100%. And there's comments in the chat about, well, Neves can protect, and he can, but like you said, in a 3-5-2 or a 3-4-3 or whatever, you have a lot more people in and around you. And really, he plays very similarly to the way that Ceballos and Xhaka played for us in the 3-4-3, sitting really tight in front of the back three to protect us from danger. And if you want to play a little bit more risky, high wire type football, where we're standing at the halfway line and pushing resources forward, allowing Tierney and our right back maybe, and all of our offense to just do what they want to do, then you got to have people that can cover big patches of grass. You have to have people that can cover from sideline to sideline. And for me, Neves is not that person. If you allow Tierney to go forward all the way up and you don't necessarily have anybody else tracking back, your CDM needs to be able to protect. And Neves is just not that guy. I've watched many games of Wolves and compilations of Neves, and what I get from him is great passer. But if we're looking for somebody to cover large areas of grass, he's not the guy. And I think to evolve, we need a Basuma, so I agree with you.
And I think people are making the mistake where you're removing Xhaka and you're assuming his replacement has to replicate that. But no, I think what we're saying to everybody in the chat is Thomas Partey is taking over that responsibility. He is our conductor. He is now going to be in charge of the progression and the build-up, okay? And I think people confuse that with numbers and traditional sixes and whatnot. But Thomas Partey, again, I repeat, is our Thiago. He is the one that's going to be setting the pace. And, I think that's a big reason why he's actually struggled with something like Granit Xhaka. There's two alphas on the ball here, and, they both want to do the same thing. And so while they're both good players, and I'm sure that, they're going to do great in certain situations, there's a limit to what we can achieve with something like that. So I think that replacement, think of Granit Xhaka leaving and Thomas Partey taking over that responsibility. And then it's not replacing that conducting progression, it's replacing that transition loss, because Thomas is no longer going to do that. So the roles have switched, right? And so that new replacement has to facilitate Thomas, not kind of hinder him.
It all goes back to understanding your players and remembering that the role that they play within their team is not indicative of their ability. It's about what they're being asked to do in the system in which they play. And it's very similar with Basuma as it is with Thomas Partey, where we're making assumptions about their ability based on what they're being asked to do. But Thomas has a lot more about him, it going both ways, backwards and forwards, as well as Basuma. They're both two-way players that can add a lot to our offense as well as be defensively sound. So I think let's not just see it like, okay, Thomas is definitely a 6. A lot of people for the entire season were saying he's a CDM. He's not. His passing range, his ability on the ball would show you that he's not Sissoko. He's just not that. He's just not that guy. He's so much better than that. So I would say you pay the money to pay the release clause for Thomas Partey. You let him become your Vieira. You allow Basuma to be your Gilberto Silva, and you move on with your life. So
and you reap the benefits and you become invincible, so to speak. I mean, that's the story,
exactly.
Isn't it?
So you guys, there's 124 of you guys watching. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And we're going to move on to chance creation, which I would say is probably the most, like, when we're watching games, seeing the limited amount of shots that we get, the limited amount of clear-cut chances that we're able to create is something that we do need to address in this next season in order to get our guys like Aubameyang going and stuff like that. So will somebody like a Maddison and even like a Basuma pushing up with Partey, will that allow us to create more chances and sustain pressure for longer periods of time?
Absolutely. So we kind of talked about this formula, sustaining attacking patterns, but let's just go over it again. Controlling transition is one part, and that's when we look at our pivot and our defense about what we're addressing. That's the one portion of it. And then the last portion is final third, technical security. So are we able to keep the ball? We've got it up there now, but can we keep it? And that's the big portion of trying to sustain these patterns. Now, when you look at, James Maddison, I've seen a lot of revisionism on the timeline in terms of who is James Maddison as a player. And, I think a lot of people get, marred by these misconceptions about his first season at Leicester. So I think one of the main criticisms I've seen is that, he's like a Bruno and, he's an output machine, but, I'm worried that in terms of chance creation, it's mainly from set pieces. Well, let's dispel some myths, because that in terms of the split of what you would be looking at in his first season with Leicester, that split of having mainly 80 or 60-40 in terms of his open play assists versus set pieces assists, that transition towards 80-20 in his last two to three seasons. Let's break it down even further. Over this last season, he achieved 105 shot creating actions, and of those, only 20 were set pieces. And when you break it down, that works out to 23 per 90 minutes, which is just absolutely immense. And so when you're looking at it, he has evolved much more into a final ball specialist, and he always had that. Again, I look at Brendan's system, and what people seem to forget is he has achieved all of these output metrics as a CM. It's not as a cam. It's not what he performed in terms of, the Norwich system, where he was the traditional 10 in cam. And, before his injury, he was achieving 13 goals and assists in, 15 starts. That's not too bad, So when you start looking at how a James Maddison might work with our existing players, you start to get really excited, right? For as much as I love Emile Smith-Rowe, fundamentally, he hasn't shown a consistent output or final ball. Right. And I think he'll get there. It's not that I don't think he will, but fundamentally, that's what we have right now. And we have a player that can set the tempo in the Grealish mold. And so I think he'll play in the left half space excellently. But then you need a Maddison who's a sharp shooter, kind of, poppy release player who can, shoot with both feet, who also has, by the way, a set piece specialty that we haven't had since the days of Santi. When you look at the gaps in terms of what, Emile Smith-Rowe might lack, and then what Maddison brings, and then you look at the faults between the two, they complement each other perfectly, right? You're looking at somebody who you won't maybe traditionally look at the intricate play in, maybe a James Maddison, but Emile Smith-Rowe will provide that. So when you combine the two together, it's a perfect synergy. And James Maddison's a very good presser too. I think that's very key. So when we looked at, your Odegaard and your Buendia, why does George like, Maddison? I thought you don't like a 10. Well, the thing is, he's great over long distances. He's a great presser of the ball. So when you look at somebody who can do those and also do it to the degree that he was an 8, because remember, guys, he was an 8 this season in terms of the role, he has the ability and the stamina to compete over long distances. That's the difference. So you never lose your central compactness. You never see a case where Odegaard, for as great as he is on the ball, he doesn't really burst into that space. Right? James Maddison will. And so I think you start seeing our chance creation turn from these final entry problems into actual output, right? Because we're actually very good at getting the ball into the box. We're just really bad at finishing at this point. And I think it's because we do it too slow. So when you start to add these things, right, and you increase the progression, you increase the speed of play, that chance creation that we're seeing kind of stuttering right now actually gets all of the wheels greased, and you're able to see that output because we've now got profiles in there that will take advantage of it, right? And that's what you got to look at. We got to look at complementary pairs. So it's not so much let's isolate the one name. Let's look, how does he work as a part of a whole? So how does he work with ESR and Bukayo Saka? How does he work with a Nicolas Pepe and a Martinelli? That's when you start to see that this makes a ton of sense. And so I'm super excited about James Maddison. I think, when you look at chance creation, output, set piece, versatility, he's got it all, and it's not just stats, that see that. When you look at, I look at some of the interviews that he's had, the mentality of this kid is insane. I think that's a really underrated part of scouting, when you do look at players. Well, there might be some off the pitch concerns, but if you look at his interview about how gutted he is not to make the England squad, I think we're targeting players right now that aren't at just good profiles, but also at that level just below their explosion, and they're hungry. They want to prove themselves. And you look at it, he's 24. I don't see him inhibiting Emile Smith-Rowe. I've seen a lot of fears at that. At the end of the day, Emile is young. He's 19, 20. And by the way, by the time, Maddison's 28, 29, Emile's 24. That sounds like a great progression plan to me. So I love this. I think that when you look at these things, the traditional 10, again, it's not like we need a body there. If you really look at Emile and how he played it, he goes to side, right? He goes wherever the ball is and he participates in the overload. So that's what we're looking at. And when you do get to the top of the box, guys, we don't have anybody that shoots outside the box. James Maddison does that, with
the
power.
Shot monster.
Oh my God, with venom, So it solves a lot of gaps of what we have. And I think, look, I loved Aouar, but I use this example where let's compare the two, right? Emile Smith-Rowe and Aouar, plus James Maddison and ESR. What I would argue is the latter is far more potent over short and long distances, but also output. As much as I love, an LR, and you know what? They both cover the same spaces, right? Like, it's not a space argument. They both cover it, but who is going to give you more goals and who is going to be better in transition? It's got to be James Maddison, as much as I love LR. So yeah, I'm just ecstatic about this.
Yeah. And I know that, a lot of people are like, well, can we get him? And for the purposes of these podcasts, we're just assuming we can get all of these players, and we're trying to use the most reliable links possible because we want to make it as realistic as possible. But it's not really about like what's the likelihood of us getting him, because we don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes. But even if it's not Maddison and it's Odegaard, I think you do have to bring in a creative midfielder. But what I will say is that one thing that I like about Maddison is that he's almost two-footed in a way. He's not too right-footed, but he's not left-footed. And I think in a team that is just so left-footed, the last thing we need is another left-footed player drifting into that right half space, blocking Xhaka and blocking Pepe in the space that they should be operating in. We need somebody that can offer some centrality going left and right, that has, just a little bit more centrality about them. I think that's why I like ESR, because he can go to the right or to the left. When you watch Odegaard, there's many times where him and Pepe would be trying to get the ball on their left foot, and that slows down your patterns of play. It really, really does when your players need to get it on that other foot. So somebody with a little bit more roundness to the way that they play, I think, really helps. And where Maddison is very strong and where Odegaard to me is a little bit weak is Maddison is a goal scorer. Odegaard is a passer, assister. So what we have is, it's kind of the difference between having a more Jack Grealish-esque type of 10 creative player versus an Ozil. We like Ozils, but Ozil needs many goal scorers around him. If you just have Ozil, he tends to want to pass, and Odegaard to me has that same thing about him. We need goal scorers. We need goal scorers, and we need them bad.
Yeah, and for me, I talk about this quite a bit. Like, look, I love Grealish, and when you start looking at these kind of players, what I really like is you don't want to have two players in the same zones that perform the same roles. So what do I mean by that? Look, quality might be a little bit different, but, in terms of getting an ESR and a WAR, the only criticism, if I was an opposition coach looking at something like that, is you've got two guys that, in profile are very similar. And so the output of that kind of, damaging part of the front line is very minimal, right? So when you start to look at, what a Maddison might provide and what, an Emile Smith-Rowe might provide, them working in tandem is a lot better than kind of replicating the same role. And we actually saw that with Thomas Partey, right? So in terms of facilitating these two players, you don't want to get players that do the same stuff. So for me, I couldn't be more happier with kind of the James Maddison links. I think it's a difficult deal. But one thing that I will say is a lot of the links, it's not just, I think rumor mill anymore. I think I'm starting to see a lot more convergence in terms of it. And look, guys, if we're spending 45 million on Ben White, which seems to be proceeding, I really don't think, the worries about a WAR for 30 versus James Maddison for 60 are there. I think we're in a different pool, guys. I think we're in a pool that we didn't maybe expect. Well, some of us did, that we would spend big, but I think we're in a different pool. So we don't have to worry about that. So the question becomes, who is better?
Who's the better fit? Exactly. Yeah. And one thing I want to touch on before we move on to 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1 type of thing is the importance of a Maddison for somebody like an Aubameyang. This is our guy. This is our star striker. He's still world class. And that's the one thing is, as much as I'm a critic of Aubameyang and his mentality is, I would never question the fact that he's a world-class striker, because he just is. And one bad season where he still scored more goals than a lot of other strikers in the league, I would say having a James Maddison is really important to get that guy scoring. And it also shows him that he should be excited for his next year at Arsenal, that there's going to be somebody on the pitch. Because when we started the season, Aubameyang couldn't see somebody that could get him the ball. For a striker, that's not, especially one that doesn't create his own chances, that must be gut-wrenching. So you see a Maddison coming in, you see the money being spent, and now you have a Saka, a Pepe, and a Maddison sitting in behind you, or a Mill Smith Rowe. Now we're talking. So how important is this type of signing for Aubameyang?
It's huge, right? Like, okay, look, when you have an Aubameyang, right, he is an off-the-shoulder movement striker. Okay, you cannot ask Aubameyang to participate in build-up. That's like asking Granit Xhaka to cover big distances, and then you hammer him for it. It really doesn't make sense to me. And Aubameyang, I've said it before, the runs he's making are there. It's not like he's not making those runs. And so when you look at, how is this like a fall off or a cliff? Well, I don't see it. He's actually getting some great, chances. We're just not finding him. And, I can attest to it. As a striker, why make the run if you're not going to get found? And so I'm sure it's frustrating for him. But again, it's about facilitating that profile of striker the best we can. And you do that with a lot of technical security across the front line, right? So there's two strikers. You've got your strikers that like to come deep, like your Harry Kanes. And how do you facilitate them? You need wing forwards to kind of attack the space, right? That's how you get balance in your front line. It's actually one of the criticisms I have with Arteta, really, is that he doesn't balance the front line all the time with, two runners and two creative players, which is something I really need, when I'm looking at things. And when you do have an Aubameyang, right, what he needs is an additional runner, but he needs the creatives to kind of let him move freely. And you do that by, getting a James Maddison, getting somebody on the ball that can dictate play. And maybe you shunt out ESR to the left wing again, and you've got Saka. Now you've got three players right now that love ball to feet, right? That's the big thing. And when you get that, Aubameyang doesn't have to participate. He can just focus on his movement. And so that's when you end up getting the best Aubameyang, right? And, another thing with James Maddison is he always goes forward. This is the one thing I love about James Maddison. It doesn't matter where he is. If you watch him, his first thought is, I'm going to go forward. And I just love that, when I think that's the issue right now with maybe something like an Aubameyang, who he doesn't like the ball and having to beat players. That's not his game. So let's not ask him to do that. Give that responsibility to James Maddison. And trust me, Aubameyang is very similar to who? Cough, cough, Jamie Vardy. I'm sorry, everybody, but, when you start looking at will Aubameyang come good? And then, is James Maddison a great fit for us? Guys, we're recruiting players, okay, that have performed this job at their past teams. That's another way of adaptation that I don't think I've seen many people on Twitter look at, right? Like, when you do look at a James Maddison, he has done this role exactly what we've asked, right? He's done it with Jamie Vardy. So he's very used to an off-the-ball striker. So I think you're going to see a much more aggressive, I agree, a much better Aubameyang, or not even better, because you know what? Again, guys, it's one season. I've said this in past, episodes. Like, it's literally the first season he hasn't got 15 league goals in a season. The other 5, he's got more than 15 league goals in a campaign. So, yeah, I think it's a matter of us upping our investment, right? And I think James Maddison, while he's expensive, he increases the value of those that we have. So it's a double-edged sword.
You guys are so funny in this chat. This cough cough guy, you guys are so silly. Okay, so 100% George on point as usual. So let's talk about 4-3-3 versus 4-2-3-1. Does it actually matter? Do these players that we're potentially bringing in give us the opportunity to maybe switch to a different formation? A lot of people are desperate to see us in a 4-3-3. For me, I couldn't really care less, because I think that mid-game we like to switch, and so I'll let you explain it, but because we talk about this all the time. But go ahead, you let them know.
Yeah, so I had actually an entire pod dedicated to this exact topic, where I think people are way too FIFA in their mentality here right now. Because, guys, I'm sorry, but as a coach, if I tell somebody to go 4-3-3, I'm just asking them to step 10 yards up the pitch, and I'm going 1-2 instead of 2-1 in the midfield. It's really not something that's as stringent as what people make out. Now, another thing, these systems are far more alike than they are different. So the one thing I want to kind of dispel, exactly, Hoban, you're right. We aren't in this 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. What we actually are in is something like a 2-3-5 typically. And, that's kind of the end goal. We'll always build in a 3. So fundamentally what we're going to be doing is we go into a 3-2-5 typically when we build up. And so what you're going to see is, you're going to have all fullbacks that are going to end up pushing up high and wide. And, you can have maybe a Basuma that's going to drop into the 3, and you're going to have your 2 center backs in the back line. That's going to be your 3 initially. And as soon as we transition into their half, it becomes a 2-3 where, your 2, center backs are behind. And of course, we have something like this, what Jess has popped up here. And hopefully what you do see is if you do have maybe a right back that can participate, you can chuck the right back in the far channel, and you've got that kind of that square that we looked at really with kind of our invincibles. It becomes very similar in terms of that. So we no longer play with this 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 as traditionally known. They all carry these principles of play. And so what those principles are is we have a 3-2-5 in build up. That's the same in both systems. That's whether it's Pep or Arteta system, it's the same. And then you transition into a 2-3-5, which is just really that one pivot player who kind of helped in the build-up, just steps up. That's all it is. That's all the change is, right? And when you then go beyond that, it's just I'm attacking and defending in 5 channels. That's really the commonality between the two. And so when you talk about a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1, it's really the same thing. And again, James Maddison did this, right, guys? Like he participated in a system where he was a left center midfielder. That's an 8 in Brendan's system. So he's very comfortable going from participating in midfield to popping back up in the 10. So it just it's I think we see the versatility there, but I don't think that we should hammer home this traditional 4-3-3 because the changes aren't massive, like, Noel and what we've said in the past, right? Like the changes as a coach aren't really that different. And, we do change a lot of formations mid-game. Like I said, I love to quote that West Ham performance. Guys, we've changed formations like 4 times in that game. So let's stop thinking, oh, this player's a 4-3-3. He can't play in our system forever. It's about that versatility, right? So that's the big thing.
And that's where this player becomes really important in this system for me is this player is really, really important because they become another midfielder. And we see that even in Pep's system, like this is like Zinchenko on the other side. Essentially, this person becomes another midfielder, and depending on how technically good they are, they can actually add a lot in these channels here, getting the balls through to your Pepes and your Sakas and these types of guys, So, and this person allows Tierney to never have to come back, which is what we want. We want Tierney in this area as well, So that's why I'm looking at this deal for White as something that could be really interesting in terms of flexibility, because there is still an opportunity because he plays as like a CDM / right back as well, that we could play Saliba as the right-sided center back and put White in the Chambers position, which has been really successful for us at the latter end of our season. But White is better than Chambers. I love Chambers, but White is better than him. So if you have somebody in this position that has good passing range that can get it over to Tierney, but also thread these balls through to Saka, Pepe, and progress the ball, how dangerous is that, George?
It's massively dangerous. And again, I think this idea of an inverted, right back, it's also going to potentially change, right? Like we could also, what you might see is, you can have your Maddison in your traditional 10 shape, and then you can have, Saka, who I think ESR will do it, but you can put him at the left wing, right? And you add another fullback in that 5 channels, and you end up just having that box that we talked about, right? Like that's the big change in terms of what you can do. So White can be kind of in that far channel, and he has that flexibility. You hit the nail on the head. He's a better Chambers. Okay, that's really what he is. And look, if you want to make me and Jess super happy, you replace that with Baku, and there's the perfect dream for us, because exactly. you look at these players that are really comfortable in midfield, but then have the ability and actually the legs to get on that outside, right? And this is what the change is, right? So you're really going again from that 3, and then you can just change it to a box in traditional invincible shape. I kind of said it last time. I'd encourage everyone to maybe go and have a look at that masterclass video again, because it really lets us know.
Really nice.
It's amazing, right? And look, that's how I view my favorite team. It really is, and I think Jess carries similar feelings towards it. And if you're asking how does it fit, guys, I know football likes to think that they've really advanced, but honestly, guys, that's the system. It's the invincible system. It isn't necessarily totally new. We've actually seen this with a lot of the minds beforehand. So yeah, I just love that I hope people just get away that the 4-2-3-1, let's get away from formations. I have this very famous saying on Twitter, zones over formations. And that's because I want people to understand that, players are comfortable in specific areas, but, they don't have to be in the same formation every day. That's not how these players function, right? So, yeah, let's just expand our thinking really about how we're going to employ these players because, Ben White, like you have him there, he could be a right back. He could be a, CDM. He could be a right center back. He is a better Chambers in utility, right? And if you start to add things like, a holding sale, we already know Mavropanos is out. So, guys, I think we're moving towards a much more modern team. And that's really important for us. So if we can, wrap up this little segment on it, I think look at the similarities between the two formations as opposed to differences. And that's, we're going to build in a 3, and then it'll transition to a 2-3-5, and we're going to attack and defend in 5 channels. Those are the key things, no matter you're 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1, who cares? That's the same in both systems. Just remember that those two systems just have somebody go 1-2 or a 2-1. That's the change, really. It's not that deep.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You guys, there's about 141 of you guys watching right now, which is awesome. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. And for you guys that are asking about George's channel and George's podcast and George's Twitter, Ball Over Passion, look that up. Go ahead and follow him and get more of this good tactical goodness. I'm feeling it. I'm loving it. So before we get out of here, I just want to talk about, what's missing. Even if we have a team like this, there's still some tweaks that probably could be made. We kind of spoke about maybe adding somebody like a Riddle Baku. I'm not quite sure that, although I think White can play as a right back, that should be what we do. I think we need more of a Tierney on the right hand side, somebody a little bit more that's actually a right back. So besides that, what do you think is missing as well? Like, could we improve the left-hand side? Do we maybe need another striker in the future? What are you thinking if we're nitpicking?
Yeah, I'm thinking squad depth. So let's assume that we get a right back because that's the one glaring thing I really want, like you said, an outlet right back, and let's assume we address that. For me, it's squad depth, and I think again I'm a midfield man, so we need a backup left back, that's for sure, and I think that's very easy to do in this window. But I would like a little bit more squad depth, both in the front line, but also kind of in midfield. So for me, I'd love another 6-8 so that we can upgrade on Mohamed El Neni, who I think has been a great servant for the club and honestly gets bashed for really, I don't know why, but he does the job that he's needed, but we definitely need an upgrade there as a backup.
Could that be Aziz in the future? Like Aziz and Lokonga can kind of fill that void a little bit?
So it's tough because look, Aziz is a very similar profile to Lokonga actually, and this was one of my pullbacks on the Lokonga deal because I'm like, you know what, we've got Miguel Aziz there, but again, this is about competition, right? I actually see them both best as a conductor 8. So yeah, I do see kind of Aziz at that progression line on the Thomas Partey side. I would like a lot more of a sitter. So if we do get a Basuma type, I'd love a much more traditional sitter. I love Ibrahima Diallo from Southampton. He's also very young and excellent. I've loved him since
We need
Brest.
to talk. We need to talk about this separately. I was I wish I knew you at the beginning of the season when they got him from Brest. I was like, what the heck is happening? And I was like, that's such a Southampton move. And nobody thought he was great last season because it was his first season in the Prem. Watch this space. We will be looking at Diallo in a couple of years and being like, why didn't we get him? But anyways, keep going.
No, we missed a trick with him. We did. And, he's one of my favorite youngsters right now. So yeah, everybody make sure that you keep track on him because that's somebody that I would maybe address next summer. So if we're looking at next steps, squad depth, I'd love an Ibrahima Diallo. Again, another 6-8, but mainly as a sitter, right? I think we need one more attacking midfielder as well. On that one, it's tough because if I look to the academy, I don't think we actually have somebody that's ready to step in right now. Catalan Surgeon is somebody I love, but he's really quite underdeveloped physically. So if I'm actually looking, who I think is a great pickup is Matheus Pereira, who right now I'm sure is really cheap, and that is somebody that could be great as a backup. I don't know if he's going to be really at West Brom too long, but
He'll be at Leeds, I think.
I think he'll be at Leeds, and
Yeah, because they're not going to get DePaul now, so they'll probably end up with him. Mm-hmm.
So he's a great deal. Other players that I really like is Mikel Elise, who's at Reading. It's another, that's my type of 10. I really like these leggy 10s that can participate in different areas of the pitch. So I would say 6'8" is our squad depth. I would say, another attacking midfielder is something that we might need. And actually, I don't think we need a winger or strikers, guys. I think we're really set in that department, because I'm looking at Keto Taylor-Hart to have a huge season with us. Like he is my favorite academy player in our setup. And
propaganda.
I'm starting. So if you guys haven't, please look at my thread. I love Keto Taylor-Hart. He is due a Bukayo-esque explosion for me. Like, I love this kid. This kid is insane. He is 6 foot. He has Reece Nelson's feet, but with Ismaila Sarr's kind of running power. He's a very, very good prospect. And so, yeah, I don't think we need necessarily another winger or striker, because also
you've got our issues on the left as well, because I think both of us kind of feel like there's a little bit of a gap there that could be filled. Maybe somebody like him. I
think he'd be great. So, like, just to round up about what we need, it's basically squad depth, because I think this summer, and what I'm looking at right here is amazing starting 11. This can compete with the best in the league starting 11 wise. I'm not worried. I don't particularly think that, of course, let's replace White with Baku, but like an outlet right back. But after that, if we're looking for the following season to like plan ahead, just some squad depth in the midfield. And, I think we're going to get the backup left back, which is great. So, yeah, I think Keto Taylor-Hart is staying, guys. I really do. And I think that's going to be a player if we're looking for superstars. Aziz and Keto Taylor-Hart, I think, are going to be the academy next ones to watch.
Yeah, I love it. This was a really, really good show, you guys. Like, you guys were so active in the chat box. I really appreciate it. There was, at the height of the show, 140 something of you guys watching, mostly for George, but I was here for the George isms as well. I was here for it. So you guys, don't forget, Ball Over Passion. Make sure that you follow their Twitter and their YouTube channel and all those great things. And George at GeorgeV_AFC. You can also see his face now on his profile picture. He has switched it from a picture of Saliba. He has joined us with a real picture. So we love that. So go ahead and follow him there on his personal page. And tomorrow I'm going to be doing a match preview for Germany versus Portugal. And also I will be doing the watch along. I didn't get a chance to do it the other day because I wasn't feeling well, but tomorrow I will be doing that for you guys. You asked for it, so please be here. Please be here. And awesome. So I will see you guys on the next one. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, all those great and wonderful things. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.